Now I have eyes beginning to open to see the generosity and the brilliance of the Creator in the tens of thousands of innovations I use every single day. I see God's generosity in all of it. All of the tech that it takes for me to speak and you to hear me, all of it is a divine gift.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Narrative. Thanks for joining us. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and Habakkuk Mahan is here again this week. I told you, David, I'm gonna make it stick.
No, we're not going to make it stick. We're going to welcome Aaron back. And I would like to just say, Aaron, and I know I speak for Mike and President Trump, that we missed you dearly last week.
Listen,
Dearly is a strong word.
I have to be honest. I was afraid to actually listen to that. I have not listened to the last week's podcast yet because I was
honoring.
I was afraid to listen to that because of my fragile ego wasn't going to be able to take the insults I was expecting in there. But I actually did. I had multiple people tell me that the podcast was really good. So many people were telling me that it was a good podcast that I was like, well, now this is actually starting to hurt my feelings a little bit. This is like. It was fine, I'm sure, but it was like
I thought we were very restrained in how we handled your absence, Aaron. If I do say so myself, I thought we were professional and just marched on.
Well, no, that's good. I just got to say, before we get into the other news, the biggest news that I just saw that I was excited about is that Scotty Scheffler has been cleared of all charges, and it's about time that the wealthy white golfers of the world are freed from this persecution they have been experiencing.
David has no idea.
He's got no idea.
He is completely lost right now.
Yet I knew he was white.
Yeah. Somehow he figured that one out.
Imagine that.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I have no idea how I right the ship after that, so I'm going to do the only thing I know how to do, and that is abruptly change the topic to the news that we're going to discuss this week.
Yes.
And we saw some news coming out of Cleveland. I actually think this is from a few months ago, but it was detailing what the city of Cleveland has decided to do as far as marijuana testing goes with the passage of Issue 2 last November. And this is one of those things that we talked about, like, this is going to be a concern for employers. It's going to be something that they have to figure out. And now we're seeing some of this discussion around the city of Cleveland and what it means for this government agency to roll back these restrictions on drug testing and things like that as a condition of employment.
Yeah, and again, this is one of these things when we think about the long-term effects of public policy on culture. This is one of those big ones that years from now, I mean, we're already experiencing this, but years from now, we're going to look back and see the state of our cities and not fully appreciate that the downward spiral happened because of decisions like this, right? So in this context, what happened was Cleveland Mayor Justin Bibb had said they're no longer going to drug test for marijuana in hiring. And, again, for a lot of folks, we can, if you've not understood the harms of marijuana, we've covered it multiple times on the podcast. I'm sure we will cover it more and more as more states like Ohio legalize commercial use, recreational use of marijuana. But when you see the effect that this is going to have on city services, on the way our cities are run, it's going to have a very real and tangible impact. And people like Mayor Bibb, and I just think too, Mayor Bibb's a leftist. He's far out there on the left in Cleveland. But I even just think for the general population that thinks there's not a big deal around marijuana, this policy doesn't seem like it's going to be that bad. We can all look at a lot of our cities. We can look at what's happening in San Francisco, look at what's happening in Portland, and see how far they're spiraling down. And that's going to have a real impact on lives in the years to come.
I told you so. This is the slippery slope that we see all across the country. We know for a fact that every state that has legalized marijuana, traffic fatalities, not just accidents, but fatalities increase. We've just lined up with California, Connecticut, Minnesota, Montana, New Jersey, New York, Rhode Island. Is this where we want to be?
Right.
As a state. And so legalize this stuff. And so what's the next step? Well, now if you legalize it, then, everybody coming in smelling like weed and giggling and, got the munchies, you can't drug test them.
Right.
anymore. And a lot of states, actually, you can't drug test, period, right? Like Michigan, Nevada, and Washington. You just can't drug test at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and to your point, David, actually, this is something that Claire brought up, who helps produce the podcast with us. That this is just on the hiring practices, right? So they're trying to say this, you can't use drugs while you're on the job, but this is the problem with marijuana. It's different than alcohol. Is that there is no instant in the moment test to take to say, do you have marijuana in your system? Is it affecting you the same way that you can take a breathalyzer? So again, this is one more example of the way that impacts. The other aspect of this too, though, is that one of the justifications. There's a lot that Mayor Bibb said in this story that reveals the broken way that he views culture and the broken way that they view government. Right. One of the things he said was that they're doing this in part because they couldn't find enough folks that could pass a drug test because they were. Right, and that's actually something we've heard a lot from Christian business owners, is that they're having a hard time finding folks to do, especially blue collar jobs that can pass a drug test. And so their answer for that, though, instead of trying to raise the standard and encourage people to come up, is no, let's lower the bar even further. And again, as someone who lives in a big city, like the problem in our big cities is not that the standard of excellence is too high to get by. It's that it's way too low, and there's really is no bottom to this pit.
In the name of justice, it's
right.
Disgusting.
Yeah. The other thing, though, I will say that, as David was talking, reminded me when he said the other cities that have done this, it actually reminded me of one of mine and Maria, my wife's favorite stories, is the outdoor public bathrooms in Columbus. For those of you who have been to downtown Columbus, you'll notice that we have a permanent. It's not a permanent porta potty because that's kind of an oxymoron. But they built a bathroom on the corner, just like half a block from the CCV office, right there. And
the address is number 2. That's
exactly, number 2, 3rd Street.
Hilarious.
Exactly, number
that's
2.
the best part. I giggle every morning when I walk past that.
When I go on vacation this summer, I am sending a postcard to number. I want to just see where it gets delivered. I just want to understand how all that happens. And again, Maria and I laugh at it all the time, and actually she gets pretty frustrated by it because it was like there was all this story about how it was supposed to cost $300,000 to build 3 of these things. It ended up costing $700,000 to do just one of them, and then it didn't work in the cold because they didn't stop to think that Columbus gets cold in the winter. Go figure. I mean, all of this kind of stuff. But the kicker for me is that the nickname for these things, and even in the Dispatch story, they called it, the nickname for this thing is a Portland Loo. Apparently, this is something they started in Portland. And again, you want to look at the leaders of Columbus and said, have you been to Portland? Have you seen the pictures of Portland? And what about Portland says, hey, that's something we should want to be like? There's a city that's really thriving. Let's do what they're doing.
I didn't see any of these in the chop zone when all that was going on.
Exactly. Seriously.
How'd I miss it?
Right, and so again, you see folks like Mayor Bibb running headlong down this path with no vision for where they're going, and this is again just one more of those things that years from now we're going to look back, and hopefully there will be some folks, probably David when he's in his wheelchair, watching Scotty Scheffler play in the senior store, say, look, we told you so. This is where these things go.
And it's interesting, too. It was a companion article that talked about one of the advocacy groups behind the legalization side that was saying, well, what good is it to have legalized production and sale and use of marijuana if you can't get a job if you use it? So it's almost like they're tipping their hand that, we need to come up with laws that protect people who use marijuana. But business owners have a right to say, hey, we need you, to your point, Aaron, to raise the standard. We need to raise the standards of workers that we're hiring for our jobs.
Stupid policy deserves another.
Exactly. Well, and even too, again, these are taxpayer-funded roles here, right? So we as taxpayers have the right to be able to call city services and not get someone who's high out of their mind or Lord help us, call public safety. And get somebody who shows up in a right-minded state.
But the thing is, they still have, like in Cleveland, they would still have drug-free workplace policies.
Right. Yeah.
Right? You just can't test for it.
Right.
Yeah. It's insanity.
You're expected to not be high while you're on the job.
Yeah. So there's so much about this that just kind of consumes itself with a little bit of critical thought. But the more and more you look at these things, this is one of those like coming of age stories. I feel like, especially for those of us who are millennials in the room, not the greatest generation like David. Sorry, anyway, that's good.
All the way back.
But like you start to realize that when especially when you're in college and you're coming up as a young man, you're like, well, there's people in charge that are making decisions based off of sound data. They're experts and things like that. And you look at a decision like this and you read the quotes from Justin Bibb, from the mayor, and literally he just wants to be cool, right? Like he's saying all of the platitudes. There's no rationale for this. There's no good reasoning for this. It's literally he doesn't want to be a prude. He's saying all the same stuff. He had this whole quote about how saying all the same stuff about how all of our drug policies and our war on drugs and all this stuff was such a failure. No, actually we have mounds of data that shows decriminalizing drugs and all these things are terrible for the well-being of kids, the well-being of families, the well-being of businesses, downtowns. I mean, it's you cannot avoid it. Yet here we still see people like Justin Bibb parroting the lines that we heard in our freshman sociology classes in college, and it's okay for them to get away with it. It's another thing when you're the mayor of the second or third largest town in Ohio.
Yeah. To pivot a little bit here, it's a topic that we're going to go to now that we've covered before on the podcast, and that is IVF. We actually talked with Emma Waters about that not too long ago, and there's a bill that's going through Congress that's being supported by Senator Ted Cruz and Katie Britt
from Alabama.
Yep, that seeks to deal with some of the stuff that prompted that conversation with Emma in the first place, which was the ruling in Alabama about IVF, and just seems like this one misses the mark a little bit is probably the way to put it.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good transition between the two, because you similarly have politicians trying to say, no, I'm a good guy. No, look at me. Trust me, I'm a good guy here. Trying to appease culture or the media, whatever it is, and doing something really stupid. And that's what this bill is. So basically, the bill that Senator Ted Cruz, who has been historically one of the most pro-life U.S. senators in the nation, and Senator Katie Britt, who also positions herself as pro-life, basically added to the Social Security program. What this bill would do would add to the Social Security program a provision that says states cannot ban IVF. Now, first and foremost, as Senator Mike Lee from Utah pointed out, show me a state that's trying to ban IVF. Right? That this is literally not a problem anywhere. No one's banning it. That's not happening. And so what you have with Ted Cruz up for re-election this year and trying to make himself more likable and more appealing to the middle is he's brought forward this bill to say that no states can ban IVF. Again, the vagueness of this, and there's been so many good things written about this, but the vagueness of the bill. Of what does it mean to say you cannot prohibit IVF? Does that mean states can't regulate it? Because again, the number one place where abortion is happening in America today, if you believe life begins at conception, if you believe life begins at fertilization, the number one place abortion is happening is in IVF clinics, because we're creating dozens and dozens of fertilized eggs, embryos, right, which are human beings. We're creating dozens and dozens of them, oftentimes for every woman that comes in or family that comes in, and then we're just freezing them. And then we're implanting probably 3 to 6 to 8 of them at a time. And if multiples take, then we're selectively reducing, which also means aborting. And so, states have, whether or not you think IVF should be banned or whatever, there's so many things around this issue that should be regulated. And when Republicans are just so thirsty and conservatives and pro-lifers are just so thirsty to show that they're good, reasonable people and win the praise of the left and the media, these are the types of dumb things that we do.
It was shocking to see that Cruz was on this. I mean, there's no real policy in it, and it's prohibitive to good policy and regulations. And typically, whenever he opens his mouth, it's very substantive, it's very detailed, and I think he was a Supreme Court, justice, a state Supreme Court justice, and to see this was a shocker. So this is one of those laws or bills I'd like to really dig into and see where is he coming from with this.
Yeah, and it really is when I was actually in Washington last week, when this was really starting to pick up and talk with folks, and the shock on Capitol Hill that Ted Cruz would do this was real. Like, people were really taken aback that he'd put his name on something like this, and then he went on Megyn Kelly's show and was promoting it and all those types of things. So there's the moral part of it that again, if you have any confusion about that, go listen to the Emma Waters piece. There's been a lot of other really great articles written about this bill. But then there's just the political side of this, right? And this is where I want to pull aside people like Ted Cruz and say, show me one voter, right, who is adamantly anti-Ted Cruz that is going to come back around on you now because you put your name on this, right? Like, the reality is, the moment that you said anything other than I support abortion up to birth, there's a swath of voters that are never going to touch you, right? Now, you've never had those voters in the first place, right? So just even politically, right? When you see Christians do this, or you see pro-life leaders do this, where we just try to, we're less concerned about doing the right thing, and we're more concerned about trying to, win over people who don't like us. This is the type of dumb stuff that we end up doing. I think for me, Mike, the most disappointing thing about this is that this whole bioethics conversation, right? Technology has advanced so far, right, in such a very limited amount of time, and we really haven't begun to touch this area in terms of trying to catch the law up, catch policy up with where we are today. And a bill like this coming from these two people who are leaders in the pro-life movement sets us back so far to be able to have that meaningful conversation. Again, like, I don't see in our lifetime being in a place where IVF is getting banned. But this is one of those things that we should be able to say, hey, listen, we've got serious concerns on our side. I understand the pain of infertility and things on the other side of this conversation. So can we find places we can agree? Well, at least we shouldn't have this happening. At least, again, in the Alabama case, we should require that these frozen embryos be handled responsibly, right? Be labeled responsibly, that women be told about the risks that go along with egg retrievals and things like that. That's doing nothing to prohibit this. But instead, what you have now is you have a multi-billion-dollar industry that is completely shaping the narrative around this, and we have no ability to really step back and say, hey, can we at least have a reasonable conversation about what we can agree upon in this area?
As we wrap up our news segment today, Aaron, you mentioned you were in Washington, D.C. last week, and would love to hear a little bit more about that trip, especially because the reason that you were there was to go to the Heritage Foundation and accept their Innovation Prize. And I'll let you tell the audience about why they were so generous to select Center for Christian Virtue for that.
Yeah, no, it was a great. I don't often say going to Washington is a great trip. We try to limit that. Or send David. Washington, Nebraska. Those are the trips.
The hotbeds.
We really try to send David to. Exactly. But this one really was a blessing. So the Heritage Foundation, I cannot say enough about Heritage Foundations, and he's not so new anymore, but their president, Kevin Roberts, and the direction he's taken the organization. Heritage is maybe the most influential conservative policy organization in the country. And for a long time, they have been much more sort of kind of just fiscal conservative. Most folks would view them as almost libertarian leading. That Kevin's come in and done such a phenomenal job of saying, well, listen, if these are the things we say we care about, we can't, close our eyes to what's happening to families. We can't close our eyes to what's happening to kids or the unborn or things like that. And so under Kevin's leadership, there's just been a revitalization of sort of a broad spectrum view of public policy. One of those big areas is on both state issues. Kevin ran the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and now he's leading Heritage, but also on family and education issues. And so, Heritage Foundation about 3 years ago started these Innovation Prizes where they see things going on all over the country and they want to help support. They give about $100,000 grants out to organizations that they see doing really innovative work. This year, 84 different organizations applied for an innovation grant from the Heritage Foundation. CCV was one of them. And we were one of 9 organizations to receive an innovation grant for our Ohio Christian Education Network and our school and a church model. And really in particular to help us not just grow that in Ohio, but share that with other states. This is something that we're really passionate about here at CCV is obviously helping kids and transforming education. But, I really see sort of going on offense in the conservative movement today starts in the states, right? This is where we have the best opportunity to really go on offense and think differently, think about transforming and rebuilding new institutions. And that's what OSEN, that Troy McIntosh leads for us, and the school and a church model is all about, is how do we build a new education system for a new generation? That's something that doesn't happen overnight. That's something that takes years to do. I think I mentioned this at the gala, just in the 3 to 4 years that OSEN has been really working on school choice issues, we've gone from 16% of kids out of public schools to 20% of kids out of public schools. That's real momentum. And so we're blessed, grateful for what the Heritage Foundation saw in this program and that they supported us here, but also excited about what the possibilities are going to be in the years to come and starting to share this approach and model with other states.
And if you're listening and want more information about OSEN, you can go to their website, osen.org, OCEN.org, and there's specifically a school planting page up there now with information and stories and testimonials and all kinds of good stuff about how this is doable. I think that's the biggest thing to take away from this. Is absolutely doable model for any church of any size to make an impact in their community. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll have more coming up for you on The Narrative, so stick around. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. And we're back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews here with you. Aaron and David had to run, but I am happy to hold down the fort and welcome into the podcast now Tony Reinke, who is a nonprofit journalist and teacher who's sought to serve the church by writing on technology and media for over a decade now. You might be familiar with his book, 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You, but perhaps he's best known as a senior teacher at desiringgod.org, who also serves as the producer and host of John Piper's podcast, Ask Pastor John. Tony, it's great to have you, as we have been talking here a lot in Ohio about cell phone usage in schools and things like that, but I wanted to take some time to consider just usage in general for Christians and what type of behaviors we should adopt around technology in our homes. So really, what do you see as some biblical principles, maybe boundaries or disciplines that parents should be modeling or discussing with their children before they give them their own personal devices?
It's exactly right. Modeling is key. This is not a teenager problem. Grandma is on Facebook too much. Mom is on Instagram too much. So, back in 2015, I set aside a full year to get my own heart right with my smartphone habits. I was spending too much time in social media. I was being stupid with my time, foolish with my heart and my attention. And I suddenly began to think social media networks could fulfill me. I didn't say that they would fulfill me, but I was acting like they could. And of course, they never could. Instead, they distracted me from what was most important. And I use social media all the time for ministry, but I also use these platforms idolatrously as idols of security and idols of self-affirmation. Maybe you've been there. So I took several digital detoxes in 2015, time offline and away from social media, deleted my apps, turned my phone off, during the day, things like that. And I used the season to confess to the Lord what he was showing me about what was inside of me. I invested more time into prayer and Bible reading and meditation on God's truth, more time reading great books, more time with the family, intentional time with them, on trips that we planned out and did together, things like that. I reprioritized the local church as well. I just spent more time dreaming about ministry possibilities in the future. And it was a beautiful season. It was a painful season of self-scrutiny, but it was necessary and it was fruitful. And one fruit of that season being my 2017 book, 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. That book, each of my teens had to read before getting an iPhone. The blessings of growing up in a home with a dad who writes books on smartphones. That process of honest discovery with myself about social media led me to further consider life inside the attention economy, inside the Hollywood media age and this age of big digital spectacles. How can we thrive as Christians in this age of these massive, compelling digital spectacles that are all around us, every image and video clamoring for our eyes and for our attention? How do we live by faith in such an eye-dominant culture? And where do we turn so that our lives are not inundated with viral, digital, ephemeral, pointless things that don't matter? And that question led me to a second book, a meditation I published in 2019 called Competing Spectacles, Treasuring Christ in the Digital Age. In these two books, the book on smartphones and the book on spectacles, work in tandem as warnings to show the biases at work in the world and how our media pushes us towards digital spectacles and hollows out our lives from what is eternally important. There's a social dilemma at play here. Our attention is monetized, and we need limits and restrictions and legislations, yes, but there's also a spiritual dilemma at play, and it's this. Our smartphones simply give us what we most want. This is what our kids need to know, what we all need to know. I am not a victim of my phone. My phone, my social media platforms are simply delivering to me what I most want. We have affections and desires and longings, and those in our sin are misdirected. And then those misdirected desires get solidified into social media algorithms that feed those desires more and more and more. Algorithms don't tell you what to desire. Algorithms feed you what you most want. The tailored algorithm is basically a digital decipher of what we most desire. Another way to say it is that the smartphone screen is a black mirror to reflect back to our eyes what our hearts most desire in pixelated form. If our true heart is narcissistic, that's what you'll see on your screen. You'll search for things that bolster your self-image. If in your heart you harbor disdain for certain people, what you will see on social media will stoke that disdain even further. If your heart is driven by unquenchable desires for sexual lust, porn will be the thing you see on your screen. The phone discloses what your heart most wants. And you can tell yourself that you're a nice person, you're morally good, you're kind, you don't hurt others, but there's a Kafka-like nightmare awakening ahead of each of us when we look into our phone screen and we stare directly into what our hearts most desire. It's right there on the screen. So if the Spirit is at work in your life, at some point deep down, this expose will drive you to your knees. And you're not going to hear that in the cultural criticism. So we're not simply victims of Silicon Valley tricksters. We are sinners led by desires and impulses inside of us that must be crucified. And so we continue to proclaim that rhetorical interrogation of Isaiah 55 and apply it to our hearts and to our screens. Why do you spend your attention on that which is not bread and gaze at a screen for something that will never satisfy you? That's the spiritual dilemma we all face, mom, dad, teen. And we can model this in our home by teaching it. So what I realized after these painful pruning seasons was that my whole take on technology really had changed. It matured, it deepened. I had for a long time been an early adopter of gadgets, a lot of it naively so. But at the end of this process, I found myself less naive about the tech I was adopting and the tech I wasn't adopting, and more aware of the biases at play. But also at the same time, I became a lot more aware of God's generosity in the technologies that adorn my daily life. And that resulted in my meditations on the generosity of God in all of the science and medicine and computers and smartphones and cars and homes that we enjoy, all the technologies that adorn my life every single day. Yes, I'm cautious of the tools we have, and also totally amazed that I get to live in this age and not 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And my gratitude for all my tech culminated in the third book, God, Technology, and the Christian Life. It's really a capstone now of my decade-long process from seeing my own sin exposed by smartphone misuse to now seeing God's glory and His generosity in my smartphone that I use every single day.
Yeah, process is a great word for it, Tony, to see how our use can maybe be redeemed. But with smartphones having been around and so prevalent in our lives for over 2 decades now, what are some dangers, especially those spiritual dangers regarding phone and technology use that we as Christians are still either not aware of or perhaps not fighting against as actively as we should?
Yeah, great question. In 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You, I think all 12 ways are still underappreciated. Much is on the line. I think we're still learning how to balance our digital tools and integrate them into our flourishing and not to our self-destruction. That's life as technology makers and users. We make tools, we adopt tools, and then we spend years and decades trying to adapt those new tools to our ultimate flourishing. That's the process we're in right now with our smartphones. We've adopted them, and now we're trying to adapt them. But here's what I learned over that decade of writing about tech and media. The tech conversation needs to progress up in 4 stages, and those 4 stages get harder and rarer as you climb the ladder. Here's how I put it. I'm just going to lay out these 4 steps in the ladder and see if these resonate with you. Stage number 1, we identify tech problems externally. This is a view of tech in which we conclude that the app made me do it. This is the Social Dilemma documentary on Netflix. The algorithm made me do it. Big tech is ruining our lives. We externalize the sin, leave it to regulations and legislation, etc. And that's not wrong entirely, because big tech does code biases into their algorithms and apps and gadgets. They do. There's no question about it. So there has to be a public conversation about the limits of these tools. But our concern is incomplete if that's the extent of it. And I think that is the extent of it for most Christians. It's just a conversation that could really just be handled in public with non-Christians and Christians alike. And so if you think holiness is about not having a smartphone, you're in for a real shocker. And so we have to go deeper. We have to go into stage 2. Stage 2 is we identify tech problems internally. Kind of already explained this, but aware of biases in technology, real biases, and how our apps and platforms are made, constructed. Absolutely, they're there. We have to be aware of it. I must next become aware of the sinful inclinations living inside of me, because tech biases on the outside of me are pushing and pulling on the native sinful inclinations within my own heart that must be dealt with. Again, that's why I wrote 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You and Competing Spectacles. Social media, smartphones, and the attention economy in general, at their very worst, all appeal to something lurid inside of me. So what is that? That sin in me has to be addressed. That's stage 2, identifying tech problems internally, not simply externally. Then we move on to stage 3. Here's where we voice gratitude to God for our tech. Biases acknowledged in stage 1, sin patterns identified and confessed and dealt with in stage 2. Now I have eyes beginning to open to see the generosity and the brilliance of the Creator in the tens of thousands of innovations I use every single day. I see God's generosity in all of it. I see His generosity in all the things I'm using right now for me to record my voice for you in my studio and for you to hear me later. All of the tech that it takes for me to speak and you to hear me, all of it is a divine gift. And I aspire to help my kids see this by the power of the Holy Spirit. Silicon Valley is not just humans doing human things. These tools are gifts from God to be stewarded for His glory. And if you miss this stage, you have no foundation for tech stewardship. The whole tech conversation operates in the realm of godlessness. God just becomes irrelevant. He's a non-factor in the conversation. And so this is huge and required a whole book of its own. As you can see, I think in terms of books. I process things in terms of books. And processing this point led to a third book, God, Technology, and the Christian Life. As God prepared his people to enter the promised land with its milk and its honey flowing, he was also preparing them to enter a land full of iron and copper. And God warns them, when you make a technological society that is wealthy and comfortable, and if you fail to glorify God for all of his generosity in everything that you make, you are an idolater. For whatever reason, God's people are short-sighted and blind to his generosity when they hold shiny metal things in hand that they have made. That's the story of Deuteronomy 8, specifically verses 9 to 20. If you want to read that, Deuteronomy 8, verses 9 to 20. So when we pull lithium from the ground and aluminum and iron and silicon and cobalt and nickel, and we refine those elements into new iPhones, that iPhone is a gift from the Creator he coded into his creation, for which we can now praise him. Most Christians will never get to that point. They'll never reach this stage in their tech theology. When most Christians think of the iPhone, God is irrelevant. He's out of the picture. Our kids pick up on that really quick, which is why stage 3 is super important. That's because stage 4, finally, we are called to live out our tech stewardship. Aware of the biases in tech, step 1. Aware of the sin inclinations inside of me, step 2. And now beholding God's generosity in his material gifts of his creation, step 3. Technology in my life can now conform to my calling and inform how I use tech and how I parent tech stewardship in my home. This is the hardest part of the tech conversation. We are called to love God with all that we are and love our neighbors as ourselves, and our tech gifts can help us do both of those things. I've dedicated my life to online ministry for that reason. I believe in it. And so I want to employ my tech gifts to love and serve others. I believe electricity and data coding and the digital age and computer chips and smartphones and laptops and the internet, all of it was ultimately God's idea. He is the first cause of all of it in his creation, inherent within his design for the material reality that he gave us as a gift to cultivate. But again, that's hard, and we tend to just get stuck at stage 1, and it's the spiritual danger almost no Christian appreciates, not being able to move from stage 1. The algorithm made me do it. And so our parenting, for example, sounds a lot like, no, you can't have that gadget, no, you can't use that app, no, you should never do that thing, look at that thing online, no, no, no. And it never gets into the yes and amens of stewardship, of a vision of a life for how to glorify God and serve others with the devices that we have. And so this 4th stage has huge implications for pastors and parents and for anyone trying to figure out tech ethics. But again, it's just really hard to get there because our tech ethics is really lagging behind. We settle on being tech dismissive and just remain there. So it's just easier to settle into a stage 1 or maybe into a stage 2 ethics and never move into stages 3 or 4 for gratitude and stewardship. In fact, I'd be willing to say that most Christians stagnate at stage 1, the app made me do it, and never even get into stage 2 of doing the hard work of heart work. And so when it comes to stage 3 and 4, I'm hoping Christians will learn this over the years and decades ahead. It's not something you can add fast. It takes years to learn and appropriate these things into our lives, especially since we've been told a lot of things that I think are wrong about technology. We have to unlearn certain things before we can learn new things. But without this basis for stewardship, we're lost and we have no way forward but to dismiss the tech age as just Babel-like godlessness. We can only diss on technology as we hold our iPhone in our hand. And our kids pick up on that dishonesty pretty quick.
Yeah, it's a tough balance to find between that no, no, no and the yes and amen of knowing that this is a good gift that we can steward. To help us maintain that appropriate or healthy balance in our cell phone and technology usage, what are some diagnostic questions or practices that Christian parents and teens should regularly be asking or doing in order to not be swept away by our own cell phone usage?
Yeah, there's a lot we can do as far as practices. iPhone contracts are useful to set out expectations for a teen before they get their phone. All devices, charged at night in mom and dad's room or some neutral place, never in a teen's room. That can be really super helpful. Sundays offline can be helpful. Things like those are helpful. None of them are distinctly Christian. You can get a lot of really good ideas online about certain boundaries you can put in play in your home, but those aren't distinctly Christian necessarily. We get Christian when we ask the right diagnostic questions. That's exactly the right approach and what you suggested in your question. And here are 8 questions that you can use with yourself and that you can use with your teen as well. Question 1. How much of my media is for escape, and what am I escaping? Question number 2, does my screen time leave me more recharged or more depleted? Question 3, is my media diet enriching my time with Christ or eroding it? Number 4, how consistent is my personal devotional life? Number 5, what does my prayer life look like? Number 6, is my communion with God drab and boring, or is it alive? Number 7, how do Christ-centered sermons and songs affect me, and what does that say about how I protect my heart and my affections for Sunday worship? And number 8, are my digital desires serving my God-given duties, or are they distracting me away from them? Those 8 questions cut to the heart of the matter in the age of the spectacle, as it has been called. The Bible says Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied, and never satisfied are the eyes of man. That's Proverbs 27:20. So the graveyard is never full of coffins, because Sheol is an open mouth, always consuming day and night. So are our eyes. That is so vivid. It's like a cemetery. Our eyes are like a cemetery, insatiable, always roving, never satisfied by anything in this world. Fallen eyes endlessly consuming death without end. Wow. So I love the resolve in Psalm 101:3. I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. On whatever will not profit my soul, I will not focus my eyes. That's an incredible resolve. Later, the psalmist echoes this same challenge, but in the form of a desperate prayer in Psalm 119:37. There he prays, God, turn my eyes from looking at worthless things and give me life in your ways. And that's how resolves work. It doesn't take very long before we desperately cry out to God to make the resolve actually happen. And that's what the psalmist does as you look at Psalm 101:3 and then Psalm 119:37. Which means our greatest enemy is not the external seducers, nor the spectacle makers. Our great enemy is our own insatiable eye appetite, that is death. Again, that's absolutely frightening. So in Numbers 15:39, God tells Moses to tell the people of Israel, follow the will of God in his word, and do not follow after your own heart and your own eyes. So if you fill your eyes with the spectacles of this world, you will grow deaf to the voice of God. Again, that's Numbers 15:39. And so when the psalmist cries out to God in Psalm 119, turn my eyes from looking at worthless things and give me life in your ways, he's saying the fullness of life is not fullness of eyes. And that is the competition we feel, because we can fill our eyes with endless spectacles in every direction. And in the end, it's a feeding on death, a feeding on what cannot satisfy you, cannot give you life.
And just so we don't end on too much of a down note here, it can be discouraging when you see all the ways that cell phone usage can go wrong. But I'm wondering, how can we apply the gospel to our lives and to our hearts and preach it to our kids, especially when cell phone usage, smartphone usage does drift outside of those healthy and appropriate margins?
So, how does the gospel come into play here? This is absolutely huge. I'm glad you asked this, because into this spectacle-loving world that we live in, with all of its spectacle makers and spectacle-making industries, came the grandest spectacle ever devised in the mind of God and brought about in world history, the cross of Jesus Christ. Christ crucified is the hinge of history. It's the point of contact between BC and AD, where all time collides, where all human spectacles meet one unsurpassed, cosmic, divine spectacle. From this moment on, God intends for all human gaze to center on this climactic moment. In the cross, God says to us, This is my beloved Son, crucified for you, a spectacle to capture your hearts forever. And so in his account of the cross, Luke tells us in Luke 23:48 that the crucifixion event was a physical spectacle for crowds to see. But the cross is not merely a physical spectacle for the eye. Its greater glory is in serving as a spectacle for the ear of faith. So in Colossians 2:15, Paul tells us that what you could not see with your eyes was the spiritual spectacle of the victory it represents. Victory over all sin, over all evil, over all the evil inside of me. The cross is huge, so huge. In Galatians 3:1, Paul says the preaching of the cross is the re-celebration of the spectacle of the cross as if it were portrayed as prominently as on a city billboard. That's what preaching Christ means. In pulpits across the world, every single week, God says to us again and again and again, "This is my beloved Son, crucified for you, a spectacle to capture your hearts forever." Preaching reproclaims the spectacle of Christ's crucifixion over and over. So by divine design, Christians are pro-spectacle, and we give our entire lives to this great spectacle. Now, historically past and present, the driving spectacle at the center of the Christian life is an invisible spectacle. Only by faith can we see it. I have now been crucified to the world, and the world has been crucified to me, as the Apostle Paul says. Our response to the ultimate spectacle of the cross of Christ defines us top to bottom. And so Christ died for my sins of escapism, for my disdain for people, my lack of love. He died for my lust. He died for my vanity, for filling my eyes with worthless things. Christ died for the lurid desires and sins of my heart manifested on my screen. He came and died as a spectacle to the universe in order to forgive my guilt and then to free me from the power of my sins. That doesn't mean we parents are perfect users of the iPhone and tech. We're not. And when we fail here, when digital media takes too much of our attention, when we are distracted by worthlessness, our families will know it. And we can openly confess our need for Christ to forgive me, Dad, as I demonstrate in confession the beauty of the cross before my spouse and my teens once again. Now, it took about a decade for me to put all 4 stages together. It's complex. This is not easy stuff, but I hope it helps introduce other Christians and pastors and parents and even teens to see why we have hope, that we have a way forward in this age of technology to really put God at the center, to glorify Him, to magnify Him, to be grateful to Him. And I'm so grateful to God for this opportunity to share what I have learned, Mike. Thank you for asking.
Tony, this has been fantastic content today. Thank you so much for all of your work around the Christian life and technology. I encourage everybody who's listening to check out Tony's work at desiringgod.org, and we wish you all the best. Thanks for joining The Narrative. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.